openly rejecting the literal story of creation, saying that the days of creation were not literal, they were really millions of years long. Now, what are the implications of this for Christians? And more specifically for Adventist Christians? First, the Bible teaches that marriage should be between a man and a woman.
Yes, sir.
Fix it, preacher. Fix it.
Not between a man and a woman and a woman. What is the foundation for heterosexual marriage? The creation story.
Yes.
Because if you don't believe that God created Adam and Eve and married them, there's no basis to say that marriage should be between a man and a woman. It's based on the Genesis story.
Yes. Amen.
How many genders did God create?
Male and female.
Two. Male and female created He then. These days, people are saying that there are 50, 60, 70 different genders. Whatever the person thinks their gender is, that's it. If you believe that the story of creation is not literal, what happens with gender identity? It goes by the wayside. You see, the distinction between male and female depends on a belief in the literal story of creation.
Yes.
Solid word, preacher.
What happens with the legitimate distinctions between the roles of men and women?
This one is hot.
You know, feminism today has totally blurred the distinction between responsibilities of male and female. Why? Because if you believe in an evolutionary theory, you don't believe in the creation story where Adam is the head and Eve is to submit to the legitimate authority of the head. If you don't believe that's literal, there's no basis for a distinction in roles
What a
in the
word.
home and in the church.
So
By the way,
hot.
don't be offended, women. Don't be offended. Doesn't mean that a man is superior and the man is inferior. The woman is inferior. No. Jesus is subject to his Father. But Jesus is equal to his Father. So subjection is not bad. Neither does it mean that there is not equality. It means there are different roles or functions. But because feminism today doesn't believe in the creation story, there's a blurring of the roles, and women and men are competing to be absolutely equal in everything in their roles. Let me ask you, what is the basis for the observance of the Sabbath? If the days of creation were millions of years long, what happens with the Sabbath? It disappears. Only if you read the creation story literally, where God worked 6 days and rests the seventh, and then tells us to work 6 and rest the seventh, as He did, the Sabbath disappears.
Solid word.
See, the literal days of creation is a very important
Key, important.
Furthermore, listen carefully, it's interesting that Francis I has strongly emphasized that the strong should help the weak. The rich should help the poor. That goes against the theory that he teaches. Because evolution teaches the survival of the strong and the disappearance of the weak. It teaches the survival of the fittest. The strong survive and the weak disappear. So how can he say that the strong are supposed to help the weak? It goes against the theory that he's teaching. But it becomes even more serious. How much longer do we have to wait for the process of evolution to reach its end? Millions of years? Billions of years? How long do we have to wait for a new heavens and a new earth? What does this idea of millions of years do with the soon coming of Jesus Christ? It destroys the idea that Jesus is coming soon. Because who knows how long we still have to wait for the process of evolution to reach its climax.
What a word.
Furthermore, how long is God going to take to create a new heavens and a new earth? If He didn't do it in 7 days at the beginning, how long is it going to take Him to create a new heavens and a new earth at the end of time? Millions of years again? Well, that doesn't give us much hope.
No way.
You see, the idea that the days of creation were long periods of millions of years destroys the very fiber of the church, of society, and of the world.
That's right.
And that's why we are in the mess that we are in now.
Yes.
Because people do not accept the creation story.
Mercy.
But this concept of these popes does something even worse. It actually mars the character of God. Do you believe that God is omnipotent? Yes. Do you believe that God can do all things? Yes. Do you think that God has the power to create things instantaneously by speaking them into existence? So if you're saying that God has to use a method that takes millions and millions of years and He can't do it by speaking and things exist, you are limiting the omnipotence of God. Do you believe that God is omniscient? He is all-wise? Yes. My question is, isn't God wise enough to create things perfect from the start? Yes. Without having to use a method of trial and error, where there is much waste, suffering, and death? Isn't God wise enough to get things right from the get-go? Yes. You know, certain scientists wrote, evolution presents a bloody, ruthless struggle for existence. From the very beginning, where there is much waste of living substance and many false starts and blind alleys. Does that sound like a wise and intelligent God? Absolutely not. It is the method of the survival of the fittest. The strong prevailing over the weak. And the weak succumbing. It's a method of trial and error. It's a method of ironing out the glitches in the evolutionary process. What image does this give you of God? Couldn't God get things right from the start? What does this idea that creation took millions of years and there's all kinds of ruthless suffering in the animal world, what does it do with the love and the mercy of God? How can a God of love and mercy create a system or a method that involves so much suffering, cruelty, pain, and death? Does this sound like the God who dresses the lilies of the field? Does this sound like the God whose heart is pained when a bird falls out of a tree?
Amen.
The God of evolution is not the God I serve.
No, God, not me.
I serve an omnipotent God.
Yes.
I serve an omniscient and wise God. I serve a God who is love, who is merciful.
Yes, come on.
But it gets even worse. The idea that there was death long before sin actually eliminates the need for a Savior. You see, the Bible presents an unbroken sequence of events. First, Adam and Eve were created perfect.
Yes.
They had a literal fall into sin.
Yes. Restoration.
Because they had a literal fall into sin, sin spread to the entire world. And death came in as a result of sin. Therefore, we need a Redeemer
Yes.
to save us from sin and from death. But if death existed before sin, the connection between sin and death and a Redeemer is broken. Listen to what this Roman Catholic theologian wrote. His name is Carl Schmitz Mormon. In his book Creation